Yeah, my name is David Bergman. I live in New York City, and my career's been pretty varied. I'm currently the full-time tour photographer for Luke Combs, but I've also toured with Bon Jovi. Before that, I was with Sports Illustrated mostly as a freelancer, and then before that, I was a staff photographer at the Miami Herald.
How did you first get introduced to photography?
Oh boy, so I was a musician first. I was in high school. My older brother was a piano is still a piano player, musical director. And so I was always into music, and I played piano early, and then I took up drums. Sorry to my parents for that one, but I was a drummer as a kid and played drums all throughout high school, middle school, high school, and was gonna have a career in music. I was sure I wanted to be a producer. Actually, I didn't want to be a professional musician. I never really had that bug. I enjoyed playing, but I didn't really have that. But I enjoyed being in the whole scene, and I loved producing. I loved being in the studio. I went to my first year of college. I went to the Berklee College of Music in Boston, and I would hang out in the studios overnight when they would rent them out for people to record jingles. This was in the, late 80s. And so people were recording commercial jingles all on tape. And I would hang out down there. I was a college kid, freshman in college who would just hang out, and the producers at the time would let me lurk in on their sessions. And I loved it, and I had a blast, and I thought for sure that was what I was going to do. And then for a multitude of reasons, my sophomore year, I transferred back home to Miami. I'm from Miami, Florida originally, and I went to the University of Miami. And I was originally a music major. I was actually a music business major that first semester. And I always had a camera, and I always enjoyed taking photos. But, this was in the film days. I didn't really know what I was doing. Even at Berkeley, my friends' bands would go play, and I would go with them and I would take pictures. And this was like black and white Tri-X on my Canon, my old Canon AE1 program. And again, I didn't really know what I was doing. I had never processed film or anything. But then that first semester at Miami, I serendipitously walked into the University of Miami Hurricane newspaper with my camera, and the photo editor happened to be sitting there, and he's still a friend of mine to this day. And he said, "Yeah, if you want to shoot something, here's a couple rolls of Tri-X, and go out and shoot this weekend, and come back on Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and I'll show you how to process the film. And if I see anything I like, I'll give you an assignment." And that same day, it's funny, one of those fork in the road days, I also had gone into the school radio station, WVUM, which is a pretty well known, pretty popular station in the community. And because I figured, oh, that's more probably up my alley, because the production thing and all that. And for whatever reason, I just didn't click there in the 15 minutes that I was there. And then the newspaper, I followed up on that. I never went back to VUM, and I guess the photo editor saw something he liked and gave me an assignment, and that was it. I was hooked. And so the rest of that semester, I was working for the school paper. It was only a twice weekly at the time. And then the other photographers who were working for the paper, we had all become friendly, and they said to me, one of them said to me one day, "Hey, the photojournalism professors, we had a pretty small Photo J program at Miami at the time. The professors, they're seeing your stuff in the paper, and they don't know who you are. Like, you're not a photo major. They've never met you before. You should go over there and say hi to those guys." I was like, "Oh, okay, sure." So I did. And basically one of them sat me down and, had seen my stuff, and he said, "You should be here. Like, you should be here with us." I was like, okay. For whatever reason, again, I wasn't clicking with the music program, incredible music school at Miami, but it was music business. They didn't really have a production program. They had an engineering program, but it just didn't feel like what I was looking to do. Again, when I was shooting at Berkeley, my friends' bands, I remember going into the lab, like the photo store, I guess, and buying film. And I think whoever was behind the counter said, "Yeah, here's some black and white." Like, I never even shot black and white. It's like, "Here's some black and white. You should do that." I was like, "Okay, sure." Like, I was 17, 18 years old. And, I did, and I remember bringing it in, like, I didn't know how to process it, I had no idea, and, they just did it at the lab and gave me prints. And, having an I guess in hindsight, having an eye is really important. It's a just naturally, I think, and we can talk more about this, but I think creative people in general, you have to have something just that you're born with that we can't explain. I don't know where that comes from. Obviously, you can develop it. And if you don't have that naturally, you can get better at it and you can work at it. But I think the most successful creative people, you have to just be born with something. I mean, there's no way around it really to do it at that level. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy it and have fun, but for whatever reason, I guess I had somewhat of an eye. I didn't know any of the technical stuff. So at Miami, I became switched my major to photojournalism with a minor in music, of course, and uh, and then the next semester I became the assistant photo editor, and then the photo editor graduated. I became the photo editor, the editor in chief of the yearbook, and all of that stuff. So that's really where it all started. And then I started freelancing in the area. Luckily, I was in Miami, so I was in a huge market for photography, for photojournalism. All I knew was photojournalism. I didn't really know anything about commercial photography or the big world of that advertising or anything like that. It was all newspaper work for me. And so I started freelancing for UPI, United Press International. I remember I was still in school. I remember the photo editor of UPI down there at the time, and they were a pretty small organization down there, as UPI still is, but compared to AP or something like that. The photo editor came up to me and was like, probably in hindsight, looking for cheap talent, and so he was like, "Yeah, we need we need photographers." And so I was freelancing at UPI while I was still in school. And the Miami Heat were new, like they were only a few years old at the time. And so I was photographing Miami Heat games by myself, coming back to the office, processing color film, scanning photos, making not scanning photos, processing negatives, making prints, putting them on drum scanners, and sending them into the system. And that was incredible. So we can go on and on, but that's really where it all started for me, was that day walking into the University of Miami school newspaper.
That is unbelievable, and the opportunity that they gave you and the fact that they saw something in your photos
Yeah,
and that.
Mike Roy, who's, up at Syracuse now the photojournalism school. He works up there, last I heard. Yeah, he saw something, I guess, and, gave me an assignment.
How much was it, did you have imposter syndrome when you were shooting?
Oh, I mean, I think we all still do. I mean, imposter syndrome, I think, is natural for again, it goes back to that if you have something innately in you that helps you to be able to do this, it never really felt like work. It's like, if I'm not working that hard to do this, and it seems like everybody can do this, right? Like, how hard, why me? Why am I the one doing this? Um, when this is so easy to do. So it should be everybody. So that's where imposter syndrome comes from. Um, so, in the beginning, I don't know that I thought that much about it. I don't know that I was quite so introspective, and it was just something fun to do. I didn't know that I'd have a career, that I'd have 35 years later, I would still be doing this career. So, um, at the time, I don't know that I had any imposter syndrome because I was always involved in things like that. And in high school, I was in the band, and when I was I was a band geek in high school, and when I do something, I try to do it right. And in high school, I was in marching band, jazz band, concert band. I taught in beginning band. I was the guy who really went all in if I was going to do it. So it was the same thing with photography. If I'm going to do it, becoming the editor in chief of the yearbook was like, it wasn't necessarily a photo position, but it was the ultimate leadership role at the time because I had literally a year to make a 400-page book and with no instructions. And they just said, "Here you go, do whatever you want." And it was a full scholarship. It was a full ride. It was an elected position. I was unopposed, but it was still elected. You had to go in front of the board of student publications and make a pitch. Um, and then I had to hire staff and design the book and get the whole thing done with a budget. I did go over budget, but that's it was college, so uh, and yeah, so all of those things I think were just I didn't really think that much about it at the time. I think today I'm more thoughtful about it, and the imposter syndrome. I've talked with a lot of photographers and a lot of creatives over the years, and I think everybody has it for those reasons. Um, but I think you also get to a point. I'm at the point in my career where I'll give you a good story, a good example. There have been times when I'm in, let's say the dressing room with a famous artist, but Jon Bon Jovi. I'm in his dressing room. He's writing the set list for that night's show. And, he's literally writing down Living on a Prayer, Wanted Dead or Alive, like these, It's My Life, these monster hits. And in his writing, the man who wrote these songs or co-wrote these songs is writing the set list. And I'm photographing that. And I know in my mind, I'm like, this is insane. Like, this is crazy that I get to do this. The devil on my shoulder, the imposter syndrome guy, says, I'm not really doing anything special. Like, again, I come from the photojournalism world where you do a lot to massage a photograph and create. I don't mean in post. I mean, when you're shooting, you're looking at layers and you're looking at depth and you're looking at focus and you're trying to tell a story. So you can use the photography, the visuals to tell a story in ways that maybe most people don't really understand how we do it, but they see it and they like it, or it tells, or it conveys what we want to convey of what's going on in the moment. A moment like that, I'm not doing any of that. Like, I'm just standing there basically with a normal type lens, and I'm photographing an amazing moment. So that kind of shoots itself. So the devil on my shoulder says, "You're not doing anything special here. Anybody who was standing here with that lens in this spot would make the same photograph." And that's, I'm criticizing myself. But I've gotten to the point where then the other side, the angel on my other shoulder says, "Yeah, but you're the guy standing here." Right? And there's a reason for that. There's 35 years of the work I've put in, the trust I've gained with my clients. I mean, how many people are allowed to go into Jon Bon Jovi's dressing room? He even told me himself one day, he said, there are 3 people who can come in here unannounced, and you're one of them, And he said that to me. I was like, okay, I get it. Right. And nobody else can go in there. The other 2, by the way, are like his wife and then his, head security guard, probably his brother. Right. So, that's about it at that time. So, that to me made me relax a little bit. And I was like, all right, yeah, maybe at this particular moment, I'm not doing anything photographically special, but I was the guy who's here. And I'm the guy who's here, and I've earned that. And so I don't think that's cocky. I think that's just, that's the path that I've put myself on to be able to do that. Other people are amazing at the things that they do. But this is what I've gotten really good at, and I've worked really hard at. The thing that I work almost the hardest at this point is earning that trust, that
Mhm.
level of trust that I have with people who everybody wants a piece of them. Everybody wants to, how many people would kill to be in Jon Bon Jovi's dressing room, right? And so the fact that, when I was on tour with them, I could go in there and make those pictures. And then of course I'm smart about it. I get in there, I make pictures, and I get out. I don't sit down and go, "Hey John, what's going on, buddy? What'd you do last night?" That's not the relationship. I'm there to do my job, and I do it and I get out. I think he appreciates that too. So that's really the job, and that's helped me get over that sort of that imposter syndrome that I think we all have.
So after UPI, you went to where did you go after that?
Yeah, so UPI, I did that for, I don't know, it was probably 6 months or a year maybe, and, uh, and I kinda outgrew it. And I mean, the director of photography or the photo editor there basically said, "You need to move on to the next level." I've been really fortunate to have people like that in my life throughout the years, and when I look back, maybe I didn't realize it at the time. When I look back, people who just kinda kicked me forward a little bit, to that next level. From UPI, he, gosh, I think his name was Josh Roberts. I hope that's him. Josh, if you're out there, he was the guy at UPI who had originally come up to me. I believe it was at a press on a boat at a press event for the Orange Bowl game. Anyway, it's an obscure thing that I don't know why I remember. But anyway, he basically told me, he said, "Look, you need to go to the AP." The Associated Press was the big game in town. I mean, the AP is still the AP. This was pre, Getty days, and the AP was the biggest game in town. And he said you should go over there. He said talk to Phil Sandlin. He's the photo chief for the state of Florida. The office is in Miami. You should go see him. So I got an appointment with Phil. Again, this is 1992, early 92. I didn't really know how to put together a portfolio. I didn't know how to do any of this. Um, because even at UPI, I wasn't surrounded by a bunch of other photographers. I was working by myself for the most part. I would shoot the games, go in the office at night. I'd leave at halftime, go in the office, send out a couple of pictures. Nobody was really editing. So I remember going in to see Phil with a bunch of prints, probably a bunch of black and white prints that I had made at UPI, I'm guessing. And, uh, and I went in and Phil was great. And, he looked at my stuff and he said, "Yeah, your stuff's good. If Call me in the morning. If I have an assignment, I'll give it to you. I have an assignment for you, I'll give it to you." I was like, "Oh, I'm in. Like, this is great, right?" This is how it works. It's my big break. And you can probably guess what happened. So, first thing, again, not a morning person. I asked Phil, "What time do you come in?" He's like, "Oh, 7 a.m." Oh, 7 a.m. Okay. All right. No problem. And I would set my alarm for 6:55, wake up just long enough to drink some water and clear my throat. And I'm not a coffee person, by the way. And would call in, "Hey, Phil, Dave Bergman, you got anything? No? All right. I'll call you tomorrow. See ya." Click. And I did that for about a week. And of course, it was always no, no, no. This was a huge lesson for me because most people, after about a week, what do? They say, "Oh, he was just being nice. He really doesn't like my work." And they just give up. They just ghost it. They fall away to never be heard from again. Well, I'm not like that. So I'm a little different in that regard. I did give him an out. I always give, I don't want to be rude. So I think by the end of the week, I probably said something like, "Oh, nothing. Okay." And I said, "Is it okay if I keep calling?" And he was like, "Yeah, no problem." I was like, "Okay." You've got no idea what you're in for, but all right, here you go. So I called every day and I don't remember how long it was, but in my memory, it was a few weeks. I could say, "Oh, it was months and months." It wasn't that, but it was probably a few weeks. And eventually, "Oh, yeah, I've got this thing," and remember, I lived in Miami. This was down in, like, Key Largo. It was, like, a good hour, hour and a half down in the Keys, and in hindsight, nobody probably wanted to go, right? The staffers that he had probably was too far away, would have been a waste of their time. It was a relatively small assignment, and what it was, I'll never forget it, of course. I was like, "Yeah, absolutely, I'll be right there," and, it was, these, scientists who had been living underwater. They called them aquanauts instead of astronauts, they were aquanauts, and I don't remember if it was a world record or something like that, but it was a big deal that they had been living underwater for months and months, and the last one was coming up finally, and I was gonna photograph. So I went there with, like, 2 rolls of color neg film, and I probably only had 1 body. I didn't really, again, didn't really know exactly what I was doing. Um, Shot it as best I could, tried to get, like, wide and tight, whatever I could, and drove back to the office. Phil processed the film in the Noritsu machine and notched a couple of frames on the negatives, scanned a couple pictures, and sent me home. Said, "Thanks. See ya." And the next morning, USA Today, which was, again, a big deal at the time, ran a tiny, tiny little thumbnail photo of that from that assignment. And the thing is, the AP, most newspapers just say give photo credit as Associated Press or AP. USA Today, I don't know if they're even still around, but they always put the photographer's name. So it was Dave Bergman at the time. So it said Dave Bergman AP, picture this big. It was the Aquanaut, and he had come up. He was in the wetsuit. His hair was slicked back, and he was spitting water like out of his mouth, as we do for fun, right? And that was the picture. That morning, Phil called me for the first time ever and said, "Hey, good job yesterday. We need you to go down to Dolphins camp and photograph Don Shula." I was like, "That's it," and that's where it started,
The
and that was
door
it.
opened, you step
Door
right
was
through it.
open, man. I always say, just give me a toe in the door, and I'll push my way in. But I got to get that toe in, and that was it. And it was just persistence. It was calling that lesson of persistence. I'll never forget it, and I still use it to this day. And I can be borderline obnoxious about it. There's definitely a fine line that you don't want to push past. But I most people just give up, right? When I was younger than that, in like middle school, I wanted a job at a movie theater, and I remember filling out the paperwork, and I saw them put it in a big pile, of applications like that. And of course, they didn't call me. And a week later, I went in and I said, "Hey, just curious, if I can get an interview, or whatever." "Oh, what's your name?" "Bergman." "Okay." And she goes over to that same pile, pulls my thing out, says, "You can go upstairs for the interview." And I got the job, because it's like they're not gonna call anybody. It's the people that come back and that follow up and that are persistent that are gonna get the gig, and or at least the opportunity for the gig. So that was a huge lesson for me, and, thank you, Phil Sandlin. I hear he's still doing it he's retired, but he's, up in Northern Florida, and, he was a big part of my early career, and then I started freelancing for the AP. and that was where that started.
And then, how long were you with the AP, and, what kinda stuff were you shooting for them?
Yeah. So this was all sort of a compact period of time in the first 2 or 3, my early 20s. So, um, um, I was, it was probably about maybe a year or so, but I was freelance. So I was freelancing also for the Miami Herald. I was fortunate to meet some of the photographers over there. And, eventually, I think I was hired part-time staff at the Herald first because they didn't really have a full-time position. Here's another lesson I learned. I don't know if I've ever told this story either, but you being in the photo J world, you understand how this goes. Um, I was a young kid. I was looking for a full-time job desperately. I was very frustrated because they wouldn't hire me. They hired me 20 hours a week, but like you can't work more than that. So, it was really a challenge at that time. I was 22 or 23 years old. And um I started putting feelers out, and there was a job opening at the oh, what's the Virginian Pilot in Norfolk, Virginia. And I had lived in Miami other than my 1 year in Boston. I lived in Miami my whole life. And the pilot, I talked with them. They flew me in for an interview. I spent the weekend there. I was told it was down to 2 people, me and one other photographer. And I didn't tell the Herald. I didn't wanna make a big thing out of it. I just went for the interview, and, I of course, I learned later after I got back that everybody knows each other in this business, and it got out at the Herald that I had been there that weekend, and I was like, "Yeah, man, what do you want me to do?" Like, I'm interviewing for jobs, and miraculously, like a week later, or even that week, a job opened at the Herald that wasn't open before, and that they offered to me, and I called Virginia.
Conveniently opened. Do you think
Conveniently
that
open. What a coincidence,
I
right? That
know.
all of a sudden, when you're, like, actually ready to maybe leave, that a job opens up. So, and I don't blame them for that. That's just the way it works, right? That's human nature, I guess. But, and so I called Virginia, and even before I don't know if I would have gotten a job, probably not. But if I don't know if I would have gotten, but I very kindly thanked them for the opportunity, and they understood. I'm like, if I can stay here and get a full time job at the Herald, so I did that. And Yeah, and I was full time at the Herald. This would have been 93 till I left in '01. So, and that job really was the first time I could exhale, like now, okay, I'm a full-time staff photographer at a giant newspaper. I mean, this in the '90s. The Herald was the largest paper in the state. We covered all of, as much of Central and South America as we could. We were the basically the paper of record of the Southern Hemisphere. And I was a kid. I was the youngest kid on staff, and we had all these Pulitzer Prize winners, and I shared a darkroom with Patrick Farrell and Carl Joost, who are like, 2 amazing photographers. Pat has at least 1 Pulitzer, maybe a couple by now. Carl's an incredible photographer. So just good people, and I shared a darkroom with them. And so, like, if I had a question about how do I print this, I learned from them. I remember before I was full time, I was freelancing there, and I was still a student, so I must have been 21, 22. I was still taking classes at Miami. I had not taken the studio photography class yet, and I knew nothing about studio lighting. And they wanted me to do a mugshot of one of the columnists for their column, right? And that's a simple photograph. It's not a hard photograph to do. But I had never worked with lights before. I literally had never touched studio lighting. I didn't know how flashes worked at that level. And I had to go out to the desk and say, I'm sorry, I really don't know how to do this yet. And they were like, "Oh, we'll have Brian show you, when he gets in, he'll be," and I was like, "Brian?" And it was Brian Smith, who again is another Pulitzer Prize winner and, legendary photographer. He's a Sony artisan. He wasn't at the time, but he was a staff photographer at the Herald. And so he, in 15 minutes, taught me more in the studio than I probably learned, maybe even through today. Cause just having the access to that level of staff. We had Bill Frakes shooting sports, and we had all these amazing photojournalists, like I said, Smith and Patrick, and the Tim Chapmans, and I mean, it was just insane. Maurice Cohn-Band, and it was incredible, the staff that worked at that paper. Um, and so, yeah, so I spent from '93 on working at the paper, and that really is where I learned how to. I was kind of a shy kid at the time, and I learned like you can't be. I mean, you just can't. You gotta fake it till you make it. I would be at a like a protest, and there's people yelling and screaming and carrying signs and marching, and I would photograph them kind of with a longish lens because I didn't want. But then you had to get names, right? You had to go up to them and talk to people, strangers, on the street, and get their, oh, I'm from the Miami Herald. What's your name? What's your blah blah blah? And because otherwise, I don't know if this is still a rule, but we would not publish a photo without a name. I mean, it had to be accredited to a person because without a name, it's who know, it could be just fake, right? So, um, I know it's a very different world today, but they literally would not. Doesn't matter how good the photo was, if you didn't have a name, they wouldn't uh, publish it. So so that really taught me those next few years. Uh, you got to just come out of your shell. Like I said, fake it till you make it, and just do it. Just nobody's gonna. I don't know what's the worst that happens, right? So those years were great, and then I started shooting more and more sports. I wasn't really a sports guy growing up, but I enjoyed the photography. I don't remember how that even started. I always liked the photos and, um, I got to go to some games as the 3rd or 4th person and really, really enjoyed it and eventually became sort of the lead, sports guy at the Miami office, which was the big office. And my assignments, my week was basically like, Heat game, Marlins game, Panthers games, Dolphins games. I would travel on the weekend, Hurricanes, Dolphins. Um, and that was incredible. I just love that. I know where that started. It started when I was a student at Miami because it was the University of Miami. We were winning national championships back then. We almost won it this year. So close. But I that was where it all started because if you worked your way up at the University of Miami, you got to shoot football. That was the big thing as a student. So I loved doing that. And I still to this, I have pictures of Dennis Erickson being carried off the field after winning the national championship. I was a student, uh, and I look back at those pictures, I go, "Oh man, that's a decent photograph," And I was just a kid in college, um, so I really became the. We didn't really have a chief sports photographer position per se, but I was pretty much that guy at the Herald throughout those years, and it was a blast. It was so fun just doing that over the years.
And then, I know you have quite a few Sports Illustrated covers. What
Yeah,
was
well,
stories with that? Who were you shooting for, during that time? I mean,
yeah,
and
well,
then, yeah, what did you do after the Herald?
Yeah, so 2001, I think I got to a point, it was a convergence of a lot of different things. My ex-wife, my wife at the time, wanted to move to New York. We had talked a lot about it. I was kind of on the fence about it, but I sort of realized that I had kind of done not everything there is to do, but I'd been at the Herald now for 8, 9 years, and I could see the future. I could see 30 years down the road still being I didn't know what was going to happen with the whole industry. Although I vividly remember saying, newspapers, it's not a growth industry, right? I mean, you could tell even in 99, 2000, video was becoming a big thing in our industry. And Craigslist was like starting to tap into classified ads, and newspaper advertising was going down, and it really was early internet days, and we were shooting digital now, and some of us were. I was the first guy in the Miami office to shoot full time digital, and then by 2001, late 2000, early 2001, kind of decided, all right, we're going to make the move and go to New York and basically go from being a medium-sized fish in a small pond to a tiny fish in a giant pond and just go freelance. So I moved to New York City. I knew some of the Sports Illustrated people just because of shooting all the sports over years. I had done Olympics and Super Bowls and a lot of big games, and so you kind of meet. It's a smallish industry, and you kind of get to know everybody. And SI obviously is everybody knows all the SI people. So I was fortunate to get. Uh, I was friendly enough with Steve Fine, who was the director of photography of Sports Illustrated at the time, and it's a great story actually. It was late 2000, fall 2000, and I was assigned to go do a Dolphins Jets game in New York because I was covering the Dolphins, obviously. And I went in, and it was a Monday night game, if I remember correctly. And I was already thinking about moving to New York. It was a discussion we were having, my wife and I were having. And so uh, I remember contacting Steve and saying, "Hey, I'm going to be in New York. Any chance, I could come by? Would love to see you, see the office." He's like, "Yeah, come on in." Um, I guess it would have been Sunday, right? So Sunday is kind of a slow day during the day at SI because when it was a weekly, because the football games are all during the day. The film hasn't really come in yet. The film's coming in late that night. This is in the film days. And Monday's the big day. Monday is when they put everything together, excuse me, and then they close the magazine Monday night. So this was a Sunday. My game was the next day. So I flew in either that morning or the day before. And so I went to the office, and I was fortunate because it was empty. It was just Steve was there, a couple people. The managing editor, whose name is escaping me right now, apparently was from Miami, great guy, and he was from Miami, and he used to get the Miami Herald every Monday delivered in New York. And so he knew my work because he would see I was shooting, Saturday and Sunday. I was doing football every week. And we were running big, big pictures and lots of pictures. And so he knew my name, he knew my work. So Steve said, "Yeah, let me come introduce you." So I had this surreal moment where I'm sitting in the office with the director of photography and the managing editor of Sports Illustrated, just the three of us. The World Series is on. It's the Subway Series, Mets Yankees. So that was 2000. And while we're sitting there having this conversation, and I'm like trying not to freak out because again, these are like very important people in the sports photography world and the sports media world in general. And I'll never forget and I'm not a big baseball guy, but I remember this. Uh, if you remember that year was the um, Clemens Piazza bat throwing incident. And it literally happened while we were sitting there watching. And it was just one of these moments where I'm like, does anybody see this? Like, what is happening right now? So bottom line is I obviously had a good time with those guys. And then SI, this was all just a weird convergence of things because SI was still shooting film, but they had thought about going to digital. They were just thinking about starting to go to digital. They were going to buy some gear and kind of test it out. I had been shooting digital for a few years at that point. So they didn't have anybody who had ever shot it before. So I said to them, "I think I'm going to move here in, the beginning of the year. Would you have any assignments for me?" "Well, who knows? We'll see how it goes." So I moved beginning of February, 2001, and they assigned me within a week, assigned me to go to the Daytona 500. And which was funny to me because I was like, I just came from Florida, but okay, whatever. And but what the thing was, they have some of the best, obviously, photographers on the planet. They had people who covered Daytona every year. I didn't know anything about NASCAR, right? I actually went out and bought the book NASCAR for Dummies and read it cover to cover because I literally had no idea.
I hope you
Um,
still have that book.
I wish I did. I wish I did.
Uh,
But yeah, I should. If I knew how important it would be to my career, and I read it cover to cover, and then, but the reason they wanted me to go was to bring the digital stuff. So the race is on Sunday. They said, bring all your film gear, shoot Sunday, just whatever you want. We have people assigned to do the important stuff. And then if anything happens, like if there's a rain out or something and it goes to Monday, the magazine closes on Monday. So if they shoot film on Monday, it's very hard to get it in to the office. They'd have to hold presses. It would be very expensive. They said, "You know what? If anything crazy happens, you'll be there to shoot digital, mess around with it. Let's see how it goes." This was my first big assignment. I had done freelance gigs for them. This is my first real assignment living in New York. And so that year, February 2001, unfortunately, Dale Earnhardt died on the very last lap of that race. He was in a crash on the last turn at the very last lap. Now I wasn't in that corner. I didn't have that, but just so happens on film, I was shooting film on Sunday. Just so happens totally randomly because I didn't know what I was doing. Had pictures of Earnhardt getting in his car before the race, putting on his helmet, like tight shots of him with his helmet on, looking at me, I had all that on film. It basically turned out to be the last photos of him, really, before the crash. They used that in the commemorative, right? It was a big, big pictures in the commemorative. But then for me, the crazy thing was they said, "Okay, Sunday night, we're sending all the other photographers home." This is Sports Illustrated. but stay and go Monday, go to the track and see if there's, people there, whatever, see what's going on. And of course, there were people laying down flowers at the track. There was, where the crash happened. They had, things there to memorialize him. And so I shot that as best I could. I went I had to drive down the street to some random hotel on that because there's nothing around there. Found some random hotel, and this will date it, right? In their lobby, I was like, "Can I just use a phone line in your lobby?" I had to plug into a phone line in their lobby. They had no rooms available. It was right after the Daytona 500, and I plugged in, was maybe able to get 2 or 3 JPEGs out, right? Because this is on old phone lines. They were very slow. Um, and this is at 2 in the afternoon on Monday. One of the pictures got in the magazine, in that week's magazine. And they just blew their mind that they could get in a photo. They'd never done this before. Got in a photograph that was taken, drove down the street, transmitted, and it made the weekly magazine. So between what I'd done, on film and then having to do this, I became the digital guy at SI. And again, freelancing, but they hired me basically to then train all of their staff photographers, these legendary Sports Illustrated staffers. I During the week, I would go to their houses, I would fly to them, I would hang out with them, sit down at the computer, teach them how the cameras work. These guys knew how to shoot pictures, but they didn't know the technology. Some of these guys had never didn't even own a computer, right? I mean, I don't think Heinz Klutmeyer had ever touched a computer in his life, right? At that time. And so I had to teach them not only how the camera is different, but also how to deal with the images. And so, and this was just ingesting and transmitting. This wasn't even, they're not doing any editing or anything. So I got to work with them during the week, and sometimes we'd go to a game together and we'd shoot and then come back and edit, and transmit. And I got to know everybody really, really well. And, I came in as somewhat of an expert, I guess, and um, spent a couple of years doing that. And then on the weekends, they would assign me assignments on digital. I had the first 2-page double truck on digital in Sports Illustrated ever. I was in a helicopter overhead the U.S. Open golf tournament, and what's his name? Goosen, Retief Goosen. Am I saying that right? I'm not a big golf guy either, but um, and it was like a playoff hole or something like that, and it was just overhead, and it was 2 pages from uh, from a digital file, and again that had never happened before, so it was great. It was a good time for me that next couple of years, just getting to know everybody. And, again, the magazine, the way it works with something like that is they have to trust you. All right. It's Sports Illustrated. It's the same. It goes back to this trust discussion where um, if they're going to send somebody up in a helicopter at the US Open or, send somebody to even just to cover a random football game, it's hard to break in. People get upset with that. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, it's both, right? You have to know how to do the job. But there's lots of people who can do the job. They're going to hire somebody they trust, that they don't have to babysit. They don't have to talk them through when I was at the Herald, I remember vividly where I would be standing around the photo desk and somebody was on the road doing something, probably not sports, but some, a news assignment or something. They'd be on the road and they would call in constantly and be like, "Where's this happening?" Or "How do I do this?" Or they would go to a game or something. They would say, "Where do I get my credential?" And the people in the office, they don't want to deal with you. They got enough stuff going on. I loved, I was very proud of the fact that I was very what's the word I'm looking for? Self-contained. I don't know if that's the word, but I would just get it done. So there were weeks where I would send in photos from the game and they would say, "Where are you? What are you doing?" And I'd be done. I'd be sending in the photos. I'd be like, "Oh, it's the Dolphins game in Buffalo." "Oh yeah, okay, no problem. Thanks. Bye." And that was it. And it was just so working for somebody like SI, those 2 years really, those however long that was, those 2 or 3 years allowed me to build up that level of trust. And then I just became one of their regular contributors. I never became a staffer. They never really had a staff position open. Actually, they were over those years, they were getting rid of staffers, staff positions, I should say. So, but I became one of this freelance, and then they had what they called contributing photographers, which was kind of in the middle. Basically, they treated us like staff. There were probably 5 or 10 of us. They treated us like staff, we didn't get paid like it. That's all. Um, but again, now I'm in my 30s. I'm working for SI. I'm traveling the world. I'm covering big games and playoffs and Super Bowls and more Olympics and World Series and all that stuff. And it was incredible. I mean, it was just that was another one of those like, really, really, oh, okay, sure, you're paying me for this, all right, cool. And it's hard work, as you know, it's always we don't always tell people about the hard part of it, but it's long hours and it's physically demanding and all that stuff. But you know, if that's the worst part of my day, I'll be all right.
How many covers did you get?
So yeah, I don't really keep track of that, but 13. I've got 13.
13 covers.
Yeah, 13 covers. If you
Man,
include like commemoratives and those kinds of things, it's 13 covers.
what's your favorite?
Well, the one that people tend to know is from the Super Bowl when the Saints won the Super Bowl and Drew Brees is holding his kid up in the air and the confetti is coming down. That one's mine. So
I was about to mention that.
that's my party trick when people go, "Have we seen any of your work?" I go, "Well, maybe this one." They go, "Oh my God, you did that!" So that's the one people know. But mostly football, a couple of basketball. There was one portrait and an SI for kids, but yeah, mostly football on those covers. So yeah, and actually, I'll tell you a funny story about the first one. Um, there was so I'd been there a few years at this time, and the thing about the cover is not always the best photograph of the week. It has to be connected to the story, whatever the cover story is, and of course, if they have an inkling of what the cover story is going to be, they're going to send their top people there and all that. So I usually, I was the new kid, so I wasn't the guy they were sending to. So I didn't really have the opportunity to get a cover too often. But there was one week, and again, one of these things I'll never forget. There was one week where um, I feel like a couple of the people in the office were kind of rooting for me to get a cover because I remember that I got the call and they said, congratulations. And this was on, I don't remember if it was Sunday. It must have been Monday. It had to be Monday, early in the day on Monday. And somebody called me and said, congratulations, you got your first cover. It's going to be, it was, what's his name? It was the Detroit Lions quarterback, Harrington. I don't know. Somebody will correct me. But anyway, it was, and I don't know if that's his name. Anyway, so uh congratulations, you got your first cover, blah blah blah. And it was an older photo, but they it wasn't from that week's game, but they were just doing a story about him or whatever. And I was like, oh my God. And I called my mother and I got my first cover. It's coming out this week. I'm so excited. And then later that day I had to call in and talk to the photo IT guy, Phil Jackie, who was a friend of mine. We had become friendly over the years. And I called, and he had kind of a dark sense of humor. He has kind of a dark sense of humor. And so I call in and asking him something unrelated. And he goes, oh, I heard you almost got the cover this week. And I go, that's funny, man. Cause he knows that's like just a dagger to the heart, and I go, oh, that's really funny. He goes, no, no, no. I don't think the cover's yours. I go, they already called me and told me I got it. What are you talking about? He says, I don't know. I go, connect me to, George, the photo editor, the football photo editor. And I get on the phone. I go, yeah, man, what's up with the cover? He goes, oh, yeah, man, I'm so sorry. But we had 4 covers of the same person. And we thought all of them were yours. And one of them wasn't yours. And we picked
Oh my
that one.
God.
Oh,
Oh my
I was
God.
like, oh, you're killing me. And so I
And
had to
that
call
would have been your first?
it would have been my first. So I had to call my mother.
Oh,
Oh, never mind. Didn't happen. So that's another thing I've learned. Like, don't celebrate those kinds of things until it's in print
brutal.
in your hand, until it's actually happened. Um, so it was probably another year or two before I finally got one. And it was, yeah, it was a college football preview issue with Craig Krenzel from Ohio State on the cover. But the year after they had beat the Hurricanes for the championship. Well, I should say the refs beat the Hurricanes. Anyway, that's another story. But we beat
No
Ohio State
grudge.
this year,
Yeah,
so we
yeah.
got them back. But anyway, yeah, so that was my first cover, my almost first cover and my actual first cover. So yeah, I went on again just over the years. Things would just randomly become covers, and you never really knew until it happened. But I didn't say anything until I actually saw it in print, and that's when I would say something about it.
And then after Sports Illustrated, where'd you go?
Yeah. So I was always into music, always, and I was living in New York, and SI was not my only client. I mean, they were my biggest client, but I would I was freelancing as much as I could, and I really wanted to tour. When I was at the Herald, it was about 5 years in. It was 96, I think, about 4 or 5 years in, where I learned that I could pitch my own stories, right? Because you're I was a young kid, and I just did whatever they told me to do. And finally, I felt comfortable enough to be like, "Hey, why don't I can come up with a good story here, a good, and let's pitch it." And I pitched. I wanted to do something with music. I always loved photographing concerts. I did it in college. I did it a little bit at the Herald when there was a big show in town that we'd cover. And um, I pitched a story to go on the road with Gloria Estefan, who was, big Miami icon. She had been, unfortunately, in a pretty bad tour bus accident years earlier, and they thought she'd never walk again. And she rehabbed, she worked really hard, and she was going back on tour. And it was a great story. Um, and obviously, we're the Miami Herald, so we're the ones to cover it. And to my surprise, the Herald said, "Yeah, do it." And it still took me a while to actually make it happen because, again, you've got to get to the right people. I remember meeting Emilio Estefan at an event that I was covering, some political event, and he was there. And I remember pitching him at that moment. I was like, "Hey, I'm with the Herald, and we want to do a big story about the tour, and blah blah blah. And I'll go on the road for." And he was like, "Yeah, yeah, it's great. Call so and so at my office." And that's when I learned about the good cop, bad cop thing, because the artists are almost always fantastic. If you get directly to the artist, they're great. They're always going to say yes. They don't want to be the bad guy, but they have people around them whose job it is to be the bad guy. And they're not just going to say yes to something like that without a lot more scrutiny. So I called the guy. I was like, "Hey, Emilio said it's great." He's like, "Yeah, yeah, no, it's not happening." Um, so it took me a while to massage it and to work at different angles, and finally, it did happen. And I went on the road for like a week or two with Gloria, and I got to ride on the tour bus, and I had all access at the shows. When you shoot a concert, as you know, when you shoot a concert as a member of the media, or any kind of on any kind of photo credential, you get usually 2 or 3 songs from the photo pit and, right in front of the stage, and then you're out. They literally escort you out of the building because that's it. You're just there to do your job and you go. You're not there to enjoy the show as a fan. So, and that's fine because you get your pictures, you get them in the paper, you get them wherever they have to go, and you're done. Well, now they know me, they want me there, I'm traveling with them a little bit, so I have all access, I'm backstage, I photograph her getting her makeup done, I get to see, how I get to walk with them to the stage, she's hugging her daughter, her kids, she's with her family, um, and then during the show, I can be on stage, I can be anywhere, and shoot the whole thing. I got hooked, that was really when I got hooked, so I wanted to do more of that, so I would photograph throughout, the SI years, as many concerts as I could for whoever I could, any way that I could get credentials, any way that I could do it. And I really wanted to tour. And so I would get on little small tours here and there with, bands that didn't really have any money or whatever. And that was fine. I was just sort of building it up, learning how to tour. And then I guess the first sort of big tour I did was the Bare Naked Ladies, Canadian band who I'm sure you know. It's been 1 week. Those guys, they're incredible, such nice guys, super funny guys. Um, and they were still playing arenas at the time. And so big tour with 10 buses of people, 10 tour buses of people, and I don't know how many trucks and the whole thing. And I got to tour with them and for the on and off for probably, 4 or 5 years. And it was a blast. It just was so much fun. I love the environment. I love tour buses. I love being able to go anywhere and photograph anything I want, and that whole thing. It fit really easily with me, and the people are great. I love the crew members. I love the band members. It's just these are my people. Um, so that was really where it all started. And then the big one was 2010. And I was still working for SI quite a bit, but 2010 I hooked up with Bon Jovi, and that was huge. I mean, they are still to this day, just a huge international touring band. So at that time, this was, yeah, 2010 to, for almost 10 years, I was with them, and they were doing those first few years. It was all stadiums around the world. It was arenas and stadiums in the U.S. And then, funny story. So I'll tell you how I originally hooked up with them because this is a good lesson too. Where, um, I skipped over something in 2000. I guess it would have been 2009. I uh, I was able to get a credential because I wasn't just doing music and sports. I would do whatever I could, basically, and I was able to get a credential to President Obama's first inauguration. And so, yeah, this was early 2009, and I now I've been around for a while, right? I'm not a young kid anymore. I'm in my late 30s, and I know that if I just go, the credential was through Corbis, who was representing my stock at the time, and they're no longer around, unfortunately. But I think they got 2 credentials. They gave one to their DC guy, and I convinced them to give me the other one. And even though I'm in New York now, I'm not a DC insider. I don't have any special access. At that time, I knew how to set up remote cameras, and I wanted to do all kinds of crazy stuff like that. And I just didn't have that level of access. I couldn't, nobody knows who I am in DC, so I just knew I wasn't going to get that done. So I said, well, if I just go and just shoot it, there's 500 of the world's best photographers at this event. This was a huge event. Um, I mean, at that time, the first African American president. Everybody was, hopeful and happy, and it was all good at the time. Remember those days? And uh, and if I just go and just shoot pictures from the spot that I'm assigned, who cares? Like, what's the point of that? Why would somebody pay me? Why would somebody send me to do something if I'm just going to give them the same pictures they can get from anybody else? So that's always been something I try to do, is try to separate myself from the pack and be like, what can I do differently? So I knew that since I was assigned a position, this is the Capitol Police, you don't mess with those guys. So I knew that I was going to be assigned a position that was unfortunately on the opposite side from where most of the other photographers were going to be. The riser that everybody wants to be on is on the other side, because when the president, whoever it is, holds his hand up and with the hand on the Bible, he's facing you. So that's the classic inauguration photo. I was going to be on the other side. So I was going to have Justice Roberts looking at me and Obama's back. So that's not going to be a picture I'm going to make. So, all right. First story here this is my thought process. First story is that it's the first African American president. What else is a big story here? Well, they were saying there might be 2 million people at this inauguration. 2 million people. That's a lot. I've been to a lot of big events at that time. I'd never seen 2 million people in one place. So how can I document this in a way that's kind of different? So I started researching like 360-degree lenses, and we didn't have GoPros and panoramics or anything like that at the time. This is almost 20 years ago. So um, I found a small company called Gigapan Systems, and the Gigapan was this brand new thing that they had developed. It was actually developed originally by the scientists who worked at on the Mars rover program for NASA at JPL, and very smart people, obviously. Those pictures from the surface of Mars or the moon or whatever, I guess more on Mars, where they're stitched together and then they stitch them to make a big giant photo. Well, the people who developed that technology for JPL and NASA had licensed the tech to this company called Gigapan Systems, and they made this robotic camera mount that you could put. At that time, it was a brand new thing. You could only use a point and shoot. You would put a little point and shoot in there, and then it would automate the movement of the camera so that it would give you consistent overlap. And then it allowed you to shoot hundreds of photos, as many as you wanted, and then they made stitching software also that would stitch it together. Again, this seems trivial by today's standards, but remember, this was 2009. So um so I was intrigued. I said, "Oh, that'd be interesting. I could make a big wide panorama." So I called them up and I said, "Hey, I'm photographing the inauguration. Has this thing ever been used where there are people? Because there's overlap." And they were like, "Nope." I was like, "Okay, you think I could try it?" And they were like, "Yeah, man, that'd be awesome." I mean, the inauguration, they were psyched. So they said, "We'll send you a loaner unit if you want." And I was like, "Okay, sure." So they did. Now, remember, I'm shooting my real photos, right? I've got my long lenses. I've got all my stuff. That to me is what's most important. This is like going to be a side thing. So the day of, really the night before, is the first time I opened the box. The instructions were just Xerox pieces of paper. Like they didn't have, this was not a complete, production ready unit yet. Just to learn, I, played with it a little bit. I had a Canon, like a G7X or a G10 or whatever it was, a little small point and shoot. I think it was a G10, and figured out how to make it work. Actually, to take the pictures, You couldn't connect with a USB or anything. It actually had a little plastic finger that would push down on the button. That's how I
Oh my
took the
god.
pictures. Yeah. So,
And what kind of megapixels was this camera? Like the little
so it's a good question. The camera itself was probably like a 10 or 15 megapixel. I mean, it was,
yeah.
it was pretty big at the time, but but I basically got there and set it up. I clamped it to a railing. I shot my real photos. I had predetermined the parameters, got it all set up. And then basically what you do is you zoom in as much as you can optically. You don't want to use a digital zoom, but optically zoom in as much as you can. And that one had a decent zoom on it. And then you let it go. You start it, you set the parameters and you start, and it kind of shoots, it shoots, it moves, shoots, moves, shoots, moves. And then it does the next row and it does the next row and as many as you want. And I let it go. Every once in a while, I would look over and I see that it was done. So you could hit like the button, say, do it again, And I think I made it through 4 or 5 um, passes before the battery died. It had an internal battery. I don't even think the battery came out. I think it was an internal rechargeable battery. So that was it. It was dead. I forgot about it. So the end of the day, I went and shot the parade and the whole thing, all the pomp and circumstance of the inauguration. And then that night I get back to the room, I edit, I transmit, and then I go, oh, right, let's see if that Gigapan did anything. And I remember it had that camera had, I think it was an SD card, I think. I didn't even have an SD reader. Like I had no way to read it. I was like, I had to ask around. I think I borrowed it from somebody at the Post. I think I literally went to the Washington Post and got a reader from somebody. I wish I could remember who it was. But anyway, and so I got it. So I put the pictures in and then put it in the stitching software. And then like it comes up and it was 22 by 10. I think it was 220 photos is the grid that I had, predetermined. And you see all the little frames and I go, oh, that's kind of cool. And I started the stitching and I went to bed because it was 20 years ago. So it took all night, took 6, 7, 8 hours, whatever it was. And in the morning, I woke up and there's a single picture there. And I go, oh, that's pretty neat. And it's so high res, it's 1400 and something megapixels, basically.
God.
And it's almost like Google Maps where you see the whole picture. And then as you zoom in, it pops more into focus. The Gigapan had a website you could upload it to and then embed it into your own website, like a YouTube embed. And it had that functionality, that zoom in functionality. So it would basically create tiles, and it was a whole back end that worked pretty well. So I couldn't upload it from the hotel that morning. I mean, it was too, again, we're still working on phone lines. So I drove home back to New York that afternoon. I uploaded it from home, and then probably the next day, I put it on my Facebook. This was early Facebook days, and I just did one post, and I was like, "Hey," on my blog. I did one post on my blog when everybody had a blog, and I said, hey, I did this thing at the inauguration. What do you think? And a few days later, it had 1 million views.
Oh my
So
god.
last time I looked, a few years ago, it was like over 30 million views or something. It went nuts.
Oh
It was
my
before
god.
we had the word viral, it was a viral thing. And every TV station, every website, every publication, wrote about it. And, I mean, everything from like, the Huffington Post and, all the political websites to CNET and Macworld and all the, tech publications and all the photo industry. As PDN wrote it up. And CNN, all the TV shows, wrote about it, all the local news stations. CNN interviewed me on the air on a phoner, and my website crashed after that. So that was that was kind of nuts. And yeah, it was crazy. So I bring up that story. It's a good story on its own, but I bring it up also because when I finally got the interview with Bon Jovi, this is like getting back to where I was before. Um, I I was pitching, and I wasn't just pitching them. I was pitching any artist I could get. I wasn't just going after Bon Jovi, but after years and you're trying to like, oh, you meet somebody and and you try to connect to this person or that person. And I finally got to sit down with their management team, and they had a show that night. This was in Philadelphia, and I drove down to Philly from New York. I rented a car because I don't have a car in New York City. Rented a car, drove down to Philly, and this was just supposed to be a meeting. That's it. And so I was talking to them about tour photography, and I had these ideas to sell prints from the shows, and we could do photo books and all this, grandiose stuff. And they were kind of, they've been like, John's been photographed by everybody. He's not really interested, blah, blah, blah. And just tour photography. And I was like, okay. And so I start going through my mind, okay, what else can I bring up? And I tried this and tried that. And then I mentioned the Gigapan, and it had only been a year or two after that. I guess it was a year after that. And I said, oh, yeah, I'd done this thing. And they go, oh, that was you? Like they knew it, of course. Everybody at the time knew it. And I go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And they go, oh, that was awesome. They go, oh, Jon was there. I think they said they found him in the photo and everything. Oh, that's cool. And they said, can you do that at a concert? And I was like, of course, absolutely. I had never done it at a concert before. But I'm like, of course, absolutely. The answer is always yes. And they said, can you do one tonight? I was like, absolutely. Now, what they didn't know, I had all my gear in the car just in case. I
Oh
wasn't
my
planning on
gosh.
shooting the night. I had my regular still gear. I had lights. For portraits, I had Gigapan. I had everything with me in that rental car, just on the off chance something like this would happen. And because could you imagine if they were like, do it tonight and I didn't have gear with me? It would have been, I wouldn't have been able to get home and back in time. So, so they said, great. And they put a all access pass on me. And that night I went and talked to the lighting director because I had to figure out when in the show I could do it, make it work. And I took notes and I was ready as best. And I scouted out locations and sure enough, they were doing 2 nights in Philly. This was like February of 2010 and February or March. And again, it's an online thing that you show on the computer. So that they were playing 2 nights. So I said, I'll come back tomorrow with it because I had to work all night to stitch it together. And so I drove back home, worked on it. But then the other thing I did, the extra thing that I did was that I sent in the morning, I sent the file to a buddy of mine in Philly and I had him do me a favor. And then when I got to the venue, they were like, how'd it come out? And I was like, here it is. I showed them on the computer. And then I go, but wait, there's more. And I turn around and I go, and I opened up this like 60-inch print that I had made from a friend who worked at a gallery. And they all go, wow, because it's this big wide pano and it's super high res and and they were like, man, that's awesome. That's cool. Do another one tonight. I was like, done. By the end of that night, they had hired me for 5 dates on the upcoming, on that tour. And then by the end of those 5, I was full time. So,
Unbelievable.
it's a toe in the door and that's all I need. And then I'm in. So, but, I had to have that. When people ask me how I got the gig with Jovi, they always want a good story. Like Jon saw I already had worked for SI and the covers and all that. Like Jon saw my work at SI and called me up and pulled me out of oblivion and brought me into it doesn't happen that way. I pitched, I hustled, I was in there, and again, because I had this whole history already, I was able to use the Rolodex and like, okay, how can if they're not buying on this, what else can I get them on? And the Gigapan idea they loved. And then I did Gigapans on those other 5 shows, but by show 2, they allowed me to like in between doing, because I would do a Gigapan at the beginning and then another one at the end. And in between, I was like, can I just shoot the show in the middle? Like they were like, yeah, sure. We got to ask Jon. And then they came back and said, Jon said it's okay. And so I wound up shooting those and then sending those pictures, and Jon would see them, and but I call my my marketing philosophy, I call it poke marketing. Poke, 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 poke. Like I'm not going anywhere. Poke, poke, poke. And eventually they go, okay, fine, like here, do it. So then we eventually dropped the Gigapan and I started selling prints. We worked out a, business arrangement to sell prints from the shows. And so then I was in, cause now I'm like doing business. I'm making the money instead of costing the money. And it was, and then again, it changed over the years as it does. And I wound up working for them for almost 10 years. So that's how that worked.
How many days did it take for you, shooting there that, Jon started to trust you and allowed you access and
Actually, so couple of things. So obviously those first 2 nights, he didn't know my name. By the time I was hired to do those 5, probably by show 2 or 3, what was happening with the photos was that I was sending them to my contact, who was one of his cousins who runs the merch company. So I was sending them to him, and then he was forwarding them to Jon for approvals, and then Jon would send it back to him, and then it would come back to me. And which was fine. That's the way it works. One day I was in the production office working, and Jon Bon Jovi walks in, and he looked kind of bored. He was just wandering around. He obviously had nothing to do. He might have come in to talk to somebody, but then he was just kind of there. And I was like, and I'd never met him. I'd obviously photographed him a bunch, but I'd never met him. So I was like, I'm gonna make this happen. So I kind of walked out the room to like go to the bathroom and like accidentally bumped into him. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, hey, Mr. Bon Jovi, how are you? I'm David Bergman. I'm the photographer. He goes, oh yeah, I love your work's great. Blah blah blah. I was like, oh my god, cool. And so I was like, you want to see what I'm working on? He's like, yeah, sure. And so he came over and we sat down, we looked at photos, and I said to him, I said, look, I'm sending the pictures to Joseph, and then he sent them to you. I said, I'm happy to do that. Is that the best way? He goes, no, just send them to me directly. And he gave me his email address. I was like, okay. I'm like, I'm going to protect this phone now. Like it's got Jon Bon Jovi's email address on it. Um, and so I started doing that. And by the way, if something like that happens, you want to make sure the guy who's in the middle, you make sure you let him know and you keep him included in the loop because you don't want to just cut him out. So I was like, John told me, is this what I should do? And he said, yeah, 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 no problem. So that was the first step. And then a few shows later, I remember another vivid memory. Um, After the show, I mean, it must have been the next day. Um, he was in I saw him again in production, and he came over to me and he said, last night, because now he knows me, he knows kind of what I'm doing. And he came over to me specifically and he said, last night after the show, my ankle was really bothering, or no, my knee, I guess it was his knee. It must have been his knee. He said, my knee was really bugging me. And I was sitting alone in the dressing room with ice on my knee. And I thought to myself, the photographer should be here shooting this. Like he knows it's a good photo of him in the room. He's very smart that way. He's very savvy. Obviously, he's been doing this a long time. He understands, how cool that is. Um, and he actually had the thought the that I don't know if he knew my name well enough, but he was like, we should have him here. So he said, tonight I'll probably need to ice my knee again. Just come back after the show into the dressing room and photograph. I was like, yes, sir, no problem. So A, the fact that he thought about it, I thought was amazing. And then B, that he was okay with me coming in to do that. So that night, sure enough, after the show, I like dropped my long lens as fast as I could. I ran over to the dressing room, and his security guy, who I didn't really know, was standing outside the room, and I go, John told me to come, and he goes, yeah, yeah, sure. And he like wouldn't let me in. I go, no, I swear he told me, he said he'd be icing his knee, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, and it took probably a couple of minutes. And finally he pokes his head in and he goes, oh, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, all right, go ahead. And I went in, and again, like I was there for maybe 3-4 minutes tops, maybe not even that long. Just, he was just there with his head back. He didn't really pay attention to me. He had his knee, ice on his knee, his leg up. And it was the first time I had been in there. And obviously then I sent him those photos and he liked them and all that. So I think that was the first time where I was like, okay, this is going to be awesome. you know,
Oh my
if it
god.
keeps up like this, then I'm good. And yeah, it did. It really did. And then eventually, so I was traveling. So those first 5 shows when I was doing Gigapens, I don't know if they were consecutive shows. So I was just traveling. It was like the biggest markets. And so I was just traveling in on my own. And then by later that year, they put me onto onto tour buses with the crew. But then because I am who I am, I was doing more and more of the behind the scenes stuff. And like he would have guests backstage. Any guests that Jon Bon Jovi has, these are like congressmen and NFL owners, and these are important people. It's not, regular people like you and me. Um, so and I knew how to act around those people. Again, I'm now in my 40s, right? So I'm not a kid anymore. And I know how to stay. I know the trick is knowing when to be in the room and when not to be in the room. So I
Mhm.
know when to stay out. I can hear when the meeting's wrapping up or the person's getting ready to leave. And then I'll just go in and be like, hey, let's get a picture of you guys together. And like, I've learned this about celebrities and, quote, important people like that. They have to play it so cool about things like that. Like they're like, oh, okay, fine, take the picture, Mr. Obnoxious Photographer, and I'll be like, I got no problem. Yeah, sure, you guys look great. Let's do it. And then I shoot it. And then as we're walking away, they go, send me that right away. It's like they all want the pictures,
Yeah.
but you have to be the one to make it happen because they're not
Yeah.
going to say, hey, can you come get a picture of us?
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
too
yeah.
cool for that.
Yeah.
So once I sort of figured that out, I would do that as often as I could and I would document. And then one day John was walking by me in the hallway and the tour manager was standing next to me and he said, hey, you're with us so much. You should travel. You should be traveling with us, and he just kept walking and I kind of went, "Brr," like what? Like, so, cause the band travels separately from the crew. The band's on a private jet. The crew are on tour buses. The band's on a private jet. And just the band and maybe 5 or 6 other people, core, inner circle party, inner party circle people, whatever. And, uh, and so that the next day they changed my bag tags and they moved me in to travel with the band. And that was, you talk about
Oh my
like
god.
insanity, right? I mean, yeah, literally, I was like, another one of those, right? Really? Actually, another quick funny story, just because this one makes me laugh every time. Um, the first time I flew with the full band. I think I'd flown with John because we had come from we had a week or two off, and so we were coming from New Jersey to the show, and there were only a few of us on the plane because it was just the people from this area. But the first time I was on the full plane with everybody, I don't know if they had sort of planned for me to be there. And so I show up and there's only so much seating on the plane and everybody kind of has their assigned seat. It's not, written down, but John takes the big seat and then everybody goes from there and um and I get on and I go, well, where do you want me to sit? And they're like, oh, we didn't really have a spot. So for those of you that don't know, on the private jet, sometimes there's a couch. That's such an obnoxious thing. Um, but there's a couch, but it's up against the wall, so it's like not facing forward; it's facing sideways, right? So they go, well, there's really no seat available, so just sit on the couch for now, and we'll figure it out for the next flight. I was like, okay. So the thing is, Jon Bon Jovi is there facing forward, and I'm on the couch right here. Like, literally facing straight at Jon Bon Jovi, and it's quiet, nobody's really talking. I don't know what to do. I'm like, "Do I just turn what do I don't know where to look." It was like a 2-hour
Oh,
flight, and
uncomfortable.
I'm just, like, so awkward and uncomfortable, and so and he didn't say anything, nobody said anything to me that day, but the next day, they were like, "We gotta find a pla" he must have said something to management, like, "You gotta move this guy. I can't have him staring at me the whole time." So, so they found a spot for me in the back somewhere, but it was very awkward and very funny. That was my first time on the private jet. So, uh, eventually, I got my own seat and it worked out. But it was just this super awkward moment where I was like, "You're John Bon Jovi," right? So
Unbelievable,
yeah.
unbelievable. So you did
Anyway.
that for 10 years.
Yeah, almost 10 years. It was probably the last thing I really did for them officially was probably as they got in the Hall of Fame in 2018. That was pretty awesome because they had John had thrown a private event for like the most important people in the band's career and the whole room, it was in like an old bank building kind of thing, and the whole room around the outside they just had photos on giant screens, and like 99% of them were mine, and
Oh,
that
man.
was a crazy moment. And during the show itself they have pictures on the LED that are mine, and it was insanity. um and then I think I did some stuff in 2019, but, they weren't really doing as many shows then. And then 2020 or no, excuse me, 2019, Luke Combs. I had met Luke's manager years earlier. Luke's, manager worked for a company called Sixth Man that was, they do those, like, rock cruises. So, those festivals at sea, they call them sometimes, and Bare Naked Ladies did a bunch of those back in the day, and so I had met him then, and he was just a casual friend, not somebody I talk to very often, but every couple of years or so, we'd check in and social media and whatever, and I was kinda looking to get back out on a tour. I really wasn't doing much, and he's one of the people I contacted, and I actually had a business idea because again, the way I got in with Jovi, besides the Gigapen, was also then the way I stayed with them in the early days was selling prints, and we did coffee table books, and we did all that stuff that I had pitched them. Um, and so I had this idea to do these photo workshops. Um, some of my sports friends, like Peter Reed Miller, the late Peter Reed Miller, unfortunately, um, was doing these incredible sports photography workshops on the West Coast. He was an SI guy, and he had access to, I forget which school it was. I think it was Cal State or one of the California schools, and he was able to bring photographers out, teach them how to shoot, let's say, football, and then they all got to shoot a game, right? And then teach them how to shoot baseball, and they got to shoot a game. So, as you know, getting access to those things is very hard. So, um, I would get people that would write me all the time say, "How do I get to do what you do? I want to shoot concerts." And I'd be like, "There's really no way to do it. Like you have to be either in with the band or you've got to be working for media, or there's not that much access to that, even less than sports." And so I always had this idea. I've done a lot of workshops over the years. I've done a lot of speaking engagements, and I had this idea to do a photo workshop, concert photography workshop. And I was like, this would be great. I just have to, you need the perfect storm. You need somebody who can teach. You need somebody with a bit of a following so that it'll sell. And you need, most importantly, you need a band that'll let you do it, because who's going to let you bring in a bunch of photographers they don't know, and let them shoot the show? So when I talked with Cappy, Luke's manager, about it, I pitched him on it. This was before I had even met Luke or done anything with him. And I said, I'd love to do this thing. And basically, I pitched it as a business, and without getting too deep down the financial thing, as you can imagine, if I'm making money from the workshops, then that alleviates some of the pressure off of them to pay me as much as they would need to hire me, right? So Cappy, to his credit, they were just about to go on Luke. The timing was perfect. Luke was just about to do his first headlining arena tour, which he had never done. He played arenas as an opener and had obviously had become, was becoming a big name very quickly. And this was his first solo headlining arena tour. And he said, we don't really have a still photographer. If we can get you for cheap, then let's try it. And so just like with Jovi, where it's like 5 dates, I said, I think I said at first, let's do the first 6 weeks. It was just weekends. So 6 weekends and see how it goes. He said, all right, we'll try it. And so I went out and pitched these workshops as best I could. It was hard to get people at first because everybody was like, this is crazy. Why? This isn't a real thing, right? You're going to teach me how to shoot a concert and then I get to shoot the concert. And nobody really believed it seemed too good to be true. And I started doing them and it went great. I mean, I enjoy teaching. I was having a good time during the day. We would be locked in a room for 6 hours and I had slideshows on, the whole thing, all the gear and everything. And then they got to shoot I think in the beginning arenas, I was doing 5 or 6 people, just to keep it manageable. And so it wasn't too crazy. And then they got to shoot the entire show. In the beginning, I even had Canon send me some gear that they could use. That became unmanageable because I had to travel with all that stuff. So I stopped doing that. But people would bring their own gear and they could shoot the whole show. And at the end of the night, so in the beginning, I was sending out surveys afterward, like, oh, what did you like? And it was, I'm not exaggerating here. It was literally like, if it's 1 to 5, with 5 being the best, it was literally 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Like
Oh, I
everybody loved
imagine.
it.
I
At the end of
imagine.
the night, people would come in the room. They go, that was the best thing I've ever done. Like I still to this day get emails from people saying that was like one of the highlights of my life, being able to do that. Cause as you know, it's super fun to do. And so, and just to be able to teach people how to do it better, and then they get to put it into practice. I really wanted to be very clear that you're not buying access to the photo pit. That's not what this is. You're buying access to me. You're getting a photo workshop with me. If last minute I was like, oh, Luke's show got canceled, we're going to go shoot another show, it should be just as good of an experience, right? So I didn't want Luke fans. I didn't want, I just wanted, David Bergman fans, right? So um so, and I did those 6 weeks. By week 3, they were like, you're good, just keep going. So I did those 5 years. I did those 5 years. I did 126 of them. I did them all over the world. I did them at stadiums, arenas, literally, I don't even know how many countries, all over Europe. I did Australia. After I did them for a while, they would sell out as soon as I put them on sale. It was like people buying Beyonce tickets, people be refreshing. So, it was a blast. And then honestly, it got to the point, I knew it wouldn't last forever. But it got to the point where, the problem was that during the day, I was not available to do anything with Luke. So if he went and did something fun, I only did this once, but one time I want to say we were in Maine or something, somewhere in the Northeast, and maybe in Boston or something, maybe in Massachusetts. But anyway, and he was going to go curling during the day. And I was like, and I had a workshop. And when the workshop attendees showed up, I said to them, I said, look, here's the thing. The workshop is set. Like I have it all timed out. I have my slideshow and everything. I said, "But Luke's gonna go curling. I have gotten permission to bring you guys if you want." And I was like, "You can't photograph it," because this was like a really behind the scenesy thing. I said, "But if you wanna do it, come with me, watch me photograph it. I'll teach in the car as best I can, like, because it was a long ride away too." I said, "I'll teach in the car a little bit. It's gonna be different than any other workshop." I said, "We'll take a vote. If one person doesn't wanna go, we don't go, and it's fine. Like, it's totally fine if we don't go." And everybody was like, "Yeah, let's go." So I literally took the class. We got in an Uber, and I literally took the class to the, curling rink, and we did that. But that was unsustainable also. So it got to the point where Luke, basically is famous enough and they could pay me enough to have me not do the workshops. And they just said, "We want you to be just our, we need you full time and we want you to be our guy." So I stopped doing those with Luke. It's bittersweet. I did enjoy doing them, but I also love being Luke's tour photographer. I mean, I'm his full time tour photographer. So that is an incredible gig. I would love to connect with another band in our time off. I can still do whatever I want in my time off from Luke. I'd love to connect with another band that would let me do them, because I get emails every week from people saying, "When are you doing the workshops again?"
Do you have any other future aspirations, or are you just so content and this is it, and
Oh
you're like
boy,
just gonna
that's a good question. It's a good question because I don't ever want to be complacent. I've been hustling for so long, and I've been pushing for more and more, and I'm really happy with how it's gone and where I am right now. I mean, I am full-time staff with Luke, and I love that, and I'd love to, retire with him. I mean, that would be incredible. He will outlast me. I mean, he's in his 30s and I'm in my 50s. So, I love everybody on the crew. I love Luke and management, and I would love to keep that going. At the same time, when I do have free time, I'm not just gonna sit at home and do nothing. So, yeah, stay tuned, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know exactly what that will look like. Ideally, I would love to do more workshops, with another band. That would be amazing. It could be a young up and coming band. It can be, anybody, as long as they can fit me on a tour bus somewhere, I can do that. And they get me for cheap. So, that's the trade-off, right? With the workshops. So, that would be ideal, would to be, because Luke, like this year, we're done the end of August. This is 2020. What year are we in? 26. We're supposedly we're done the end of August. So we'll see. I mean, there's always things that come up, and obviously anything that comes up, I'll do. But I've got the fall open. So who knows? Stay tuned, I guess.
well, thank you so much for your time, Dave. I really appreciate it.
I have talked you out. I appreciate you having me.